Why aren't you eating dinner? My father-in-law asked, who we were seeing for the first time in a long time for New Year's. He must have noticed that there was only enough food at the dining room table for 3. It happens all the time. What? My father-in-law looked curiously across the table at my mother-in-law and husband. What exactly do you mean by it happens all the time? A daughter-in-law who can't give her mother-in-law grandchildren would have to be a slave, wouldn't she? While chewing on the hamburger steak I had made, my mother-in-law responded as if it were second nature. That's right, Ruby is our slave. She stays in the kitchen to take care of us while we eat. My husband sipped his beer loudly and said this in the same tone as his mother, as expected. He took me to his mother's every weekend to help her with housework. Even though you couldn't give her grandchildren, I'm letting you stay here. You should appreciate her and do the best you can for my mom. I didn't want to go to my in-laws' house, but I had made a commitment. Even if I refused to go, my husband would verbally force me. He knows I have a short temper and difficulty finding my words. Mom, I brought a slave. He even greeted me that way recently. What are you talking about? My father-in-law seemed offended by the way my mother-in-law and husband referred to me as a slave. That's a normal family with children. Ruby's infertility took the possibility of grandchildren away from me. Ruby, it's not your fault. You should stop bullying her. What do you mean? You're the one that lives so far away, so stay out of the problem. That's right, Dad. Don't tell me what to do. You didn't have to watch Mom lose the possibility of having grandchildren. In rebuttal, my mother-in-law and my husband sounded like they were mocking my father-in-law. I tossed the coffee beans in the grinder while listening to their conversation. My mother-in-law and husband always ordered me to bring them coffee as soon as they finished eating. I was so busy with shopping for my mother-in-law that I only had time to eat a piece of sweetbread earlier. Come on, I'm hungry too. I'm not sure what I'm doing. As if escaping from the grinder's blade, a single coffee bean fell to the floor. My name is Ruby, and I'm a 37-year-old housewife. During the weekday lunch hours, I work part-time in the kitchen of a family restaurant. My husband and I rent an apartment. I used to work at the same local bank as my husband, but I left 3 years ago. I quit to focus on fertility treatment. We were unable to have children, so we sought medical attention and were told that the problem was on my side. After a year of treatment, I was told that it is impossible for me to get pregnant. My mother-in-law and husband changed shortly after that. Originally, we were both working and managing our own income and budgets. When I quit my job, my husband was responsible for my living expenses. He took over our savings and the bills for rent and insurance, and he started giving me money for living expenses. At first, we were able to live comfortably on $1,000 a month. However, since we don't have fertility treatments anymore, you can save money. These were the first words out of my husband's mouth when we decided to give up on trying to conceive. What? Because of the financial burden of the treatment, I've been giving you more money for living expenses, but you don't need it anymore. You can go back to work if you want. True to his word, he cut back and gave me $800, then $600, even $500 a month. Of course, there was a time when I was desperately trying to find work. My mother-in-law, of all people, got in the way of that. Working as a full-time employee is not good for a wife. She will tell you that if you don't share the housework, she will divorce you. So you're saying I shouldn't work? Of course, if it's only part-time, then fine. You need to devote yourself to Carl and serve me. You can't even have grandchildren, so it's the least you can do. Is it really so bad that I can't have children? Despite going through painful treatments, I was unable to have a child. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, changed her mind about me. My bathroom is filthy, so please come and clean it. Drive me because I'm going out to dinner with a friend. She frequently called and asked me to run errands. To top it all off, I work every weekend at my in-laws' house. Plus, no matter what I did, all she did was complain. Why are you folding laundry like that? Why not put the corners together and fold it correctly and neatly? Do it again. My mother-in-law once threw the folded laundry onto the floor. She seemed to enjoy hurting me. I'm going out for a drink. Do you want to join me? My father-in-law asked after dinner. If you don't want to, you don't need to. I was just thinking about what happened during dinner. You've been treated so badly by Elizabeth and Carl. His words pulled on my heart. I automatically started to cry. I saw that, and if you want, you can vent to me. My father-in-law took me to a local bar. It was small, but clean and cozy. We sat at a table across from each other. He ordered a beer, and I ordered a whiskey soda. We ordered mixed nuts and a salad. At the dinner table, I could tell Elizabeth and Carl were being rude to you. My father-in-law began to speak after taking a sip of beer. I've been treated badly since I gave up fertility treatment. My father-in-law listened to me tell him about how his wife and son have treated me. I'm blamed for not being able to have children and am forced to run errands. I told him my husband wouldn't let me work full-time. He's reduced my living expenses after stopping fertility treatments, and now he only gives me $500 a month. What I hate most is being called a slave. Elizabeth is not happy unless she gets her way. Yeah, I know. She wasn't like this before, but she became selfish after having Carl. She would yell at me so much that I began to dislike her, and now we pretend to be a happy couple. Do you think it's because he doesn't want to be with me? I'm jealous my father-in-law has a place to escape to. You're not tough enough to make yourself heard. Yeah, but venting to you makes me feel better. Good, that makes me happy. Before leaving the restaurant, my father-in-law and I had one more beer and one more whiskey soda. However, a situation came up right after that. I'm back. My mother-in-law and husband were standing there when I opened the door. Dad, did you have a night out with my wife? My husband says this while looking at both of us. What? I just invited Ruby for a drink. What kind of relationship is this that you can go out for drinks together? My mother-in-law looked mad. What kind of, just like your husband said. What are you thinking, Ruby? Isn't it wrong for a wife to go to a bar with a man? You can't give me grandchildren, but you still have desires. My husband and mother-in-law both pointed at me. Enough! A powerful voice echoed throughout the area as if thunder had struck. My father-in-law was enraged, staring at Carl and Elizabeth. He blew up. What is it with you? Desire? All I wanted was for Ruby to relax. The rage sped up my heart rate. Mild-mannered people can become more difficult to deal with when angered. Elizabeth. When she heard her name called, my mother-in-law shuddered. She must be scared of him. Or maybe she had something to hide. You said, what kind of relationship do you have with your father-in-law that you go out drinking together? That's, my daughter-in-law is treated like a slave, and I took her to get her mind off it. That's what happened. Because of Ruby, I can't have grandchildren. How can you say that when you hate children? What? Those words made me want to yell. My mother-in-law always blamed me for not giving her grandkids. Well, grandchildren are different than other children, aren't they? That said, I don't think you wanted grandchildren enough to treat Ruby like this. You're just making an excuse to point the finger at her. My mother-in-law looked like she was about to say something to my father-in-law, but quickly averted her gaze. Did she have nothing to say back? Or was she afraid of her husband? Carl. Wait, what? I heard you only give Ruby $500 a month for living expenses. Do you keep the rest of your salary? No, I pay rent and insurance. Even so, I don't think that's all of your salary. My husband turned his head and bit his lower lip. He couldn't think of a quick excuse. I came here to discuss our future. Let's get right to it. My father-in-law led us to the living room. What do you mean, discuss our future? Just sit down. Make some coffee first, Ruby. Don't tell her what to do. My father-in-law yelled, and my mother-in-law shuddered again. Make coffee for us, and a cup for Ruby, too. My mother-in-law nodded and sat meekly in her chair. My husband took a seat beside her. I sat on a chair further away from the table. I'll be retired in a few years. After my current assignment ends, I won't be living with you anymore. My father-in-law, still standing, started to speak. What? What exactly do you mean? Elizabeth and Carl's voices overlapped. Mr. Murphy looked at both of them. We've been masquerading as a couple for years, so we no longer need to live together. I'll live where I want, and you can stay here. That's fine, but I changed my mind after you accused me of being unfaithful earlier. I'm selling the house. Elizabeth, I'll leave you. No, where am I gonna live? My mother-in-law, as expected, was surprised and stood up. Why don't you just get a place to live? How am I gonna do that? I can't pay the rent. Get Carl to help you. He only gives her $500 a month. I'm sure he can pay for you. That's not possible. When asked to handle things financially, Carl stood up and waved his hands. He must have been nervous because he was wobbling. We don't have any money. If I do that, I won't be able to pay Mom's debt. Elizabeth gasped. My husband swallowed his words. But I for sure heard that Elizabeth has debt. Was she in debt? You just mentioned debt, didn't you? My father-in-law exclaimed, even more horrified. Elizabeth and Carl, what exactly do you mean by debt? Explain. I didn't mean what I said. I said explain. My mother-in-law burst into tears when she heard her husband's angry voice. But his rage didn't fade. Mom owes me $50,000. I'm her co-signer. With a resigned expression on his face, my husband began to speak. Around the time we stopped fertility treatment, Mom made an investment. She made some money at first, but the stock market crashed. You mean you lost money in the stock market and went into debt? I used family funds. At the time, we were put onto stocks that would go up, but eventually we got into debt. But now I'm paying it with my salary, and Mom is repaying it by working part-time at a supermarket. This was news to me. I had never heard anything about any stocks or debt. My mother-in-law had lost a lot of money in the stock market and had borrowed money to make up for it when I stopped fertility treatment. She must have tried to pay back the debt by buying stocks that were supposed to go up. But as they were both repaying debt, that stock didn't go up either. Maybe, I couldn't help but say the first thing that popped into my mind. That's also when you and Carl began treating me like a slave. Ruby, what are you trying to say? Were you just taking it out on me? The slave treatment started around the time I stopped fertility treatments. I doubt that it's because she wanted a grandchild so badly, but the simple answer is that she was taking it out on me because that was satisfying. My mother-in-law stayed silent as expected. And Carl used the money that he took out of my monthly expenses to pay off his debts. He can save money because there's no fertility treatment. He didn't give me less money for some strange unknown reason. He just needed the money to repay his mom's debt. You stupid idiot! Finally, my father-in-law blew up. Even if it's family money, it's money I worked for and saved. You put it in stocks without consulting me. To top it all off, you lost it. What the hell kind of money are you spending? After saying this, my father-in-law suddenly left the room as if he had thought of something. He looked like he was going to the second floor. We all followed him. What are you doing, Dad? Show me Elizabeth's stuff. I'll check what she's buying. Stop! She cried and screamed, but her husband didn't care. Stop it! Her husband opened the closet door as she yelled. The first thing that caught my eye was a luxury handbag. With just a quick glance, you could see at least 10 of them. Ruby, are these bags expensive? They're all luxury items, costing over $1,000. My father-in-law opened a small drawer in the corner of the closet. There was an array of accessories, rings, necklaces, and earrings. Some of them had diamonds, rubies, and other precious stones on them. I picked up the ring and looked at the inside. I found an engraving of K18, indicating it was made of 18-karat gold. Elizabeth, you bought all these expensive things without telling me? I'm sorry, but... Divorce! My father-in-law turned his eyes on my husband in disgust and he snapped. All this spending, investing in stocks without my permission, and treating Ruby like a slave? Divorce. I want a divorce. I won't take no for an answer. Then how am I supposed to live? Talk to Carl. I'll sell this house and land immediately. You can sell these bags and jewelry to pay for the move. My mother-in-law couldn't say anything back. My husband was nodding his head and biting his lip. He no longer had the arrogant and domineering demeanor that he had when he treated me like a slave, like it was a lie. The next day, my father-in-law got 2 sets of divorce papers. Here, Ruby, if you want to file for divorce too, my father-in-law said as he handed one to me. I looked at my husband, and he sighed and looked away from me. Of course I want a divorce, but more importantly, we want alimony from these people. I thought hard about this all night last night. How have I been suffering for so long? What do I want to do now? I really wanted to have a child. The fertility treatment was agonizing, but I endured it. But then I realized that I couldn't conceive. I continued my story, holding back the tears in my eyes. All the painful tests and treatments I went through to become a mother were all for nothing. I can't have a baby no matter how I try. As I was grieving, Carl told me that since I didn't need fertility treatment, he would reduce my living expenses. What? Are you saying this is all Carl's fault? Shut up, Elizabeth. My father-in-law was horrified, and my mother-in-law immediately stopped talking. My mother-in-law blamed me for not giving her a grandchild, and then she treated me like a slave. Do you know how hard it was for me? Naturally, there was no way Elizabeth or Carl would respond. But in the end, Carl just needed money to pay off his debts. For Elizabeth, it was just an outlet for the stress of losing so much money in the stock market. I want you to reimburse me for this. What if I say I won't pay? Sure, I'll talk to my lawyer. My husband put his palm to his forehead and fell silent. After the new year, my father-in-law officially divorced my mother-in-law. When he put his house on the market, he found a buyer within a few days. Someone was just looking for land to build a house in that area, so they decided to tear down the old house and clear the land before selling it. Having no place to stay, my mother-in-law moved into a rundown apartment that looked like it would cave in from a gentle breeze. She now lives with my ex-husband. In addition to their living costs, they have to pay off their debt and alimony to me, which I'm sure is very difficult for them financially. My mother-in-law is working at a supermarket during the day and a part-time job at a pub at night. My husband also works a second job on the weekends at a wedding hall in addition to his company job. They complain to everyone around them that it's hard to pay their debt and alimony while watching others become happy. Meanwhile, I moved into a beautiful little apartment and got a job through my father-in-law. It was a clerical job at a security company. He said I could use my knowledge of accounting and my skills from working at a bank. I want you to be happy. If you ever need help, just tell me anything. My father-in-law is on my side, and I will do my best in this new chapter to reassure him. And this time, I will shine on my own. The morning of my first day at work, I put on a new suit and made a promise to myself.
It's been a few months since my husband, who has a bad drinking habit, received a terminal illness diagnosis. He seems to think that it's me who's been diagnosed and has been living recklessly, drinking, having affairs. It's like he's doing whatever he wants. He even had a nerve to say something outrageous to me. "You're really tough? Like a cockroach? Why don't you just die already?" Even though he's the one who looks close to death, I wonder why he can't see it. To confront him with reality, I said something to him. "What are you talking about? It's you who's been given the terminal diagnosis." "What?" He just stood there with his mouth open, unable to comprehend my words. Looking into his eyes, I repeated myself. "I said it's you who has the terminal diagnosis." My name is Amy, and I'm 40 years old. If I had to describe my life in one word, it would be dramatic. I lost my parents in an accident when I was in 11th grade, and my relatives kept passing the buck, saying they couldn't afford to take care of me. Eventually, I ended up living with my father's sister, my aunt, but I was treated horribly there. I would be given noticeably less food than everyone else, and I often heard them wishing I would leave soon. My aunt already had 2 sons and probably couldn't afford to support me. I guess they had no choice but to act that way, being pushed into taking me in by the rest of the family. I leave this house as soon as I graduate from high school. With that determination, I started working part-time at a restaurant, and after a few years, my life took a turn. It was right after I started 12th grade.
If you haven't decided on your future yet, why don't you marry me and live together?
The man who made this proposal was my then boyfriend, now husband, Matthew. At that time, he was a full-time employee and my trainer at the part-time job. He was incredibly calm and great at teaching. We shared the same taste in music and quickly became a couple. Thank you, but are you sure, Matthew? Won't it be a burden to have me in your life?
Not at all. I have enough savings to support you, Amy, and I'm more than happy to have you. Of course, only if you're okay with it. I know I have a bad drinking habit, but I'll cut back once we're married. I always put your happiness first. So, will you marry me?
He said, taking my hand and smiling. Indeed, his bad drinking habit was his only flaw, but I loved him enough to overlook even that, and our relationship was good even after becoming a couple. That's why I happily accepted his proposal, and we got married after I graduated from high school. 2 years later, we were blessed with a child.
Well done, Amy!
When I told my husband I was pregnant, he lifted me up joyfully. Marrying the person I love and having his child, it was the pinnacle of happiness. At that time, I had no idea that such an event was waiting for us. The problem started a few months after our child was born. At that time, I was busy with childcare and household chores, and my husband frequently came home drunk from work-related socializing.
I'm home,
he'd say cheerily at the front door, and I, worried, would ask him, "Where have you been drinking until this late? And if you're going to be late because of drinking, I wish you'd let me know. I've been waiting with dinner ready." At that, my husband glared at me.
Oh, shut up. It's my life.
Here we go again. At the beginning of our relationship, I used to be troubled by his bad drinking habits. But now that we were married, taking care of him had become easier. While dismissing his behavior, I urged him to drink some water.
You know, you've aged.
What? He stared at me as he drank, and I was taken aback by his unexpected words.
I mean, you've aged. You used to take care of yourself even at home, but now you're always in an old sweatshirt and sweatpants with no makeup. Why did you let yourself go like this?
He looked me up and down as if assessing my whole appearance. There are things you can and cannot say, even to a husband with a bad drinking habit. I felt as if my efforts were being trampled on and couldn't help but retort. I can't help it. Household chores and child care are hard, and I need to save every penny for Carter's future.
Oh, making excuses is the beginning of the end. I should never have married someone like you.
With that, he got upset and retreated to the bedroom. Matthew, have you always thought that way? I spent a sleepless night, filled with sorrow, realizing my husband might have always thought so. From that day, our relationship changed. It seemed that my normally kind husband got tired of pretending after that day. He began to say harsh words, even when sober. When in a bad mood, he would kick or slap me. Light violence became a part of my life. Sometimes he would come home smelling of women's perfume, and though not confirmed, it's likely he was cheating. I've thought about divorce many times, but all I have in my bank account is the little money I saved from my part-time job days. In this situation, Divorcing and supporting myself and my son would be impossible, and the thought of giving up custody of my son to him was unbearable. Besides, seeking alimony in a divorce case would require hiring a lawyer and other expenses. Considering all this, I couldn't divorce him for the sake of my son's future. One day, amid such days, an incident occurred.
Are you Amy, Matthew's wife? There's something about Matthew we need to discuss. Please come to the hospital.
The caller was from the hospital where my husband had a follow-up health check. Surprised by the sudden news, I rushed to the hospital.
Matthew is suffering from terminal cancer.
As I entered the hospital room and heard the doctor's words, I was at a loss for words. The doctor continued speaking as I stood there in shock.
It's difficult to say this, but Matthew only has about 6 months to live. We wanted to inform you first, Amy, before telling him directly, as it can be hard to hear.
Thank you. What should we do now?
There are several options. The choice depends on the patient and the family, so it might be best to discuss it with Matthew first.
The doctor's words left me unable to hide my turmoil. Despite his recent bad attitude towards me, I had deep feelings for my husband, having spent many years together.
I'll talk to him.
I left the hospital with heavy thoughts. What should I say to him? I couldn't find the right words, no matter how hard I tried to think. As I was contemplating this, my husband returned home.
I'm home!
Drunk as usual, he demanded water as soon as he entered the living room, treating me like a servant.
Actually, I have something important to talk about.
What's with a serious tone?
He started fiddling with his mobile phone after taking a sip of water.
Listen carefully. I have received a terminal diagnosis.
When I said this, he stopped scrawling and asked,
What did you say?
I said I have received a terminal diagnosis.
Before I could clarify that it was he who was diagnosed, he asked,
Terminal cancer. The doctor said the family and the patient should decide what to do. What do you want to do?
Do whatever you want. It's not my problem.
Why are you acting like this doesn't concern you? It's a terminal diagnosis.
He paused, scrawling only for a moment, continuing to look at his phone even as I spoke.
It's not about me. Why you want me to worry? If you want sympathy, ask Carter.
That's not it. It's you.
Okay. End of discussion.
He left the living room and retreated to his room. I tried several times after that to bring up the terminal diagnosis, but he would cut me off before I could even start. Finally,
Don't talk about terminal diagnosis in front of me anymore,
he said. He won't even listen to me. Fine. Do as you please. A few months after my husband received his terminal diagnosis, it happened one morning while he was having breakfast.
Thanks for the meal.
In front of him was a barely touched breakfast. I asked him, looking pale,
Don't you have an appetite?
Yeah, lately I don't feel like eating much. I get short of breath even when walking, and maybe I'm losing strength. I'm off to work. I'll be late again today.
He left the house with a sigh. He still doesn't believe he's the one with the terminal diagnosis. I was amazed and cleared away his leftover breakfast. Honestly, seeing him like what was painful, but he had shattered my heart many times. He'd interrupt and refuse to listen whenever I tried to talk about the diagnosis. I no longer felt the need to help him, and he might as well live out his remaining time in his delusion. With these thoughts, I began to tackle the day's household chores one by one. An unexpected visitor came to my usual day-to-day life. The doorbell rang after 3 p.m. When I opened the door, a young and beautiful woman was standing there.
Hello, my name is Michelle. I'm always grateful for Matthew's help,
she said, and I recognized the scent of the perfume that lingered when my husband returned home. It was clear that she was the woman he was having an affair with. Michelle seemed to work part-time at my husband's workplace. I couldn't help but feel disdain for his method of preying on a vulnerable young woman from his workplace.
What brings you here?
Matthew is at work right now.
No, I came to talk to you today, Amy. I'll be blunt. Please divorce Matthew,
she said, looking straight into my eyes.
Divorce?
It's not that simple. We're married.
I know, but Amy, you don't have long to live, right? Then please, give him to me soon.
Clearly, Michelle also misunderstood that I was the one who received a terminal diagnosis and pressed on with the conversation.
Matthew is kind and financially stable, truly reliable. He even bought me this brand name bag. And he's been so supportive, even knowing I have no parents. You don't understand Matthew's kindness, do you, Amy?
At that moment, I felt a certain kinship with her. Our situations were similar, and she reminded me of myself when I was younger and in love with my husband. A young and beautiful woman like her shouldn't be seeking her own unhappiness. Before she regretted getting involved with my husband, I asked her something. Don't you realize you really received a terminal diagnosis? By looking at Matthew and me.
What?
Michelle was taken aback, not expecting such a question. You work with Matthew, right? He's pale, gets out of breath easily, while here I am, standing and talking to you without any sign of tiredness, my complexion healthy. Who do you think is really terminally ill?
That would be you, Amy, because Matthew said so.
Michelle looked at me, uncertain. Perhaps she was beginning to realize the truth. Besides, Matthew's money is almost gone.
What?
She was shocked again. With all the drinking and spending he does, and you must be enjoying most of those benefits, right? I bet he's given you more than just that bag. If Matthew is the one with the terminal diagnosis, you'll have a hard time ahead. Hospital bills, living expenses. Do you still want Matthew? Michelle, seemingly at a loss for words about Matthew, trembled and said,
Excuse me,
before leaving. I doubted that Michelle believed everything I said. However, if it made her reconsider even a little, that would be enough. I watched the door she had exited through, lost in thought. That night, for a change, my husband came home sober, but he clearly looked exhausted. When I asked why he sighed, he said he had tried to work as usual, but couldn't keep up his strength and had to take several breaks, which angered his boss.
Are you okay? You're really tough, like a cockroach.
As he muttered, I gave him a cold look. What are you talking about? You're the one with a terminal diagnosis.
What?
He stood there, mouth open, unable to comprehend my words. I said you're the one who's been diagnosed.
Hey, wait a minute. You're joking, right?
He shook my shoulders as he said this. I wouldn't joke about this. Looking at your recent health and complexion, isn't it obvious who's terminally ill? I answered calmly while he shook my shoulders.
You keep quiet about this?
Of course not. You just misunderstood on your own. I tried to tell you, but you didn't want to listen, so I stayed quiet.
Bastard!
Enraged by my words, he raised his hand in anger. Expecting to be hit, I closed my eyes. But no pain came. When I slowly opened my eyes, I saw my son stopping my husband's hand from hitting me.
Dad, stop it!
What? Talking back to your father?
My husband was still furious, even towards our son, but he couldn't easily shake off his hand. Uncomfortable, he finally let go and retreated to his room.
Mom, are you okay? I heard Dad yelling from my room.
My son calls out to me.
Thank you, Carter. Really, thank you.
Oh, my child has grown up so much. I might not know what would have happened without him. With feelings of gratitude for his growth, I thank him repeatedly. Then my son made a suggestion. The next morning, while I was making breakfast, my husband entered the living room awkwardly.
Good morning. Sorry for getting angry yesterday,
he said, standing next to me, and I turned to him with displeasure. What? Why are you suddenly so meek?
No, I want to apologize for everything. I'm really sorry.
He apologized deeply. Why are you suddenly apologizing like this?
No, I just realized I need you. Will you stay with me until the end? We are a married couple who've been through a lot together, right?
His unexpected words made me laugh derisively. A married couple who've been through a lot? Don't make me laugh. And what about a girl you were having an affair with?
That girl, Michelle? She hasn't returned my messages since last night, and I can't reach her by phone.
So that's why he's turning to me. According to my husband, as soon as he learned from me that he was the one with the terminal diagnosis, he immediately messaged Michelle, expecting a prompt message of concern from her, but there was no reply. Watching my pitiful husband, I felt relieved that Michelle had escaped from his harm.
So you're the only one I can rely on. Please, I'm begging you.
What do you really want? I won't understand unless you say it clearly. After a while, my husband seemed to have made up his mind, and with a deeper apology he said,
Please, lend me the money for hospitalization.
No. How will you pay it back? It's your own fault, so deal with it yourself. Besides, even if you get hospitalized, you're not going to make it. Do you really need to be in the hospital? When I said that, my husband continued.
Yeah, I know I'm not going to make it, but if I have to suffer like this at home without any medication, I'd rather be hospitalized and die a little more peacefully.
I see. That's what he's after. He wants me to pay for his hospitalization. I couldn't help but smile at my husband's ridiculousness. Seeing my expression, he seemed to finally feel relieved, thinking I had forgiven him, unaware of the worst situation awaiting him. Absolutely not. You're only being convenient now that it's disadvantageous for you, I said bluntly, and then presented the divorce papers I had kept in my apron pocket. I want a divorce.
Hey, are you going to abandon your husband, who you've spent years with and who has only a little time left?
Abandon? You abandoned me a long time ago. When I said that, my husband hesitated to speak, then asked with a hint of dissatisfaction.
But what will you do from now on? About Carter's education? Where to live?
Don't worry. Carter is planning to drop out of school and work. He's interested in car mechanics, and a friend's parents run a garage. They've offered to let Carter and me work and live there. It's fortunate to have such good friends. Until Carter drops out, I plan to stay at my relative's house. It's much better than living here. Honestly, I've been wanting to divorce you for a long time. The only reason I didn't was because of Carter. But now that Carter's future is decided, there's no need for me to stay. As I spoke firmly, my husband realized he could no longer hold me back and stared at me in disbelief. Then sign these divorce papers right now. I'll be organizing Carter's and my things in the meantime. A moving company will come later. Please, cooperate then. Saying this, I saw my husband's face, worn out and looking at me with pleading eyes until the end. He would likely spend his last days in this house. I sympathized, but it was his punishment for years of persecution. So, goodbye, Matthew. I closed the door of my home. Later, I heard from a mutual friend that my ex-husband had passed away. His family gathered for the funeral. I would probably be blamed for not being there in his last moments if I attended. I had no intention of going to a place where such negative assumptions could be made. However, after a few years, when my feelings had settled, I visited a certain place with my son.
You don't have to pay respects to such men.
Hey, don't speak like that. The place we visited was my ex-husband's grave. A mutual friend told me where it was, in a cemetery where he now rested. Honestly, I never wanted to involve myself with my ex-husband again, but I wanted to report to him that our son had grown up so much. But I wouldn't come here again. because we were moving out of state. Since then, Carter worked while gaining practical experience as a mechanic and successfully obtained his automotive mechanic certification. He's set to work in a garage out of state from spring. Let's go back. We still have to prepare for the move. As I said this and stood up to call Carter. He didn't move.
Mom, do you regret marrying Dad?
He asked, looking at me. What are you saying? If I hadn't married Matthew, you wouldn't have been born. I'm proud of you, Carter, for trying so hard to save me from Matthew. Thank you for being born. As I said this, my son shyly thanked me. Looking forward to my son's future, we left my ex-husband's grave behind.